Okay, we're ready.
All right. Let's call this meeting to order. My clock just turned to 7:32. Let's get a roll call if we can, Maria. Thank you.
Miss Anthony? I don't see. Is she here? Yeah, she's here. Miss Anthony, can you hear us? You're muted. Seems like she's not able to hear us. Or Miss Bright?
Present.
Miss Dickinson?
Present.
Miss Clement?
Present.
Mr. Kapler?
Here.
Miss Shaw?
Here.
Mr. Stevie?
Present.
And going back to Miss Anthony. Miss Anthony, are you here with us? You can also type in the chat.
Yeah, I'm having
She may have
technical
stepped away.
difficulties.
Oh, okay. So she's here. We have quorum, Mr. Chair.
Sounds good. Let's move on to agenda item number 2, review and approval of the draft LAR meeting minutes from the last meeting.
I will make a motion to approve them, Mr. Chair.
Awesome. Anyone want to second that? I guess I can second it. No?
I can second that.
Right on. Thanks, Paige. Put this up to a vote. All those in favor? Aye, or raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Hearing none. Maria, feel that passed. This portion will do a call to the audience. Is there anyone currently on this call that is not a member of the board, city staff, or associated with the case that's on the agenda today that would like to have a moment to speak to the board? Hearing none, Maria, let's move on to item number 4, activity DP 22-0173. Let's get a staff report.
Yes, Mr. Chair, we have with us Mark Castro. He's a principal planner in PDSD. He's gonna be the one leading this case this morning. Mark.
Thank you, Maria. Good morning, Mr. Chair and DRB members. Today's case is the Board of Adjustment variance case C10-23-10, Villegas Storage, which is a property that's located at 2101 North Oracle Road with the C2 zoning. The property is an approximately 12,500 square foot vacant lot that's located at the northwest corner of Flores Street and Oracle Road. And the applicant is proposing to construct a new 6,640 square foot commercial storage building. The building is proposed to be set back 0 feet along the north property line, 21 feet from the Oracle Road's future right-of-way, and 21 feet from 13th Avenue right-of-way. The project includes parking spaces on the west side of the building with access from Flores Street and 13th Avenue. The variances the applicant is requesting are as follows. A, to allow the building exterior wall to serve as the required screen for the 166 foot of length along the north property line. And B, to delete the required 10-foot wide landscape border between the 166 foot length of the building and the north property line, and allow the 5 required trees to be incorporated into the other landscape borders on site that's shown on the submitted plans. The notice of application and public hearing for the Board of Adjustment was mailed out on November 8th. And as of today, we have not received any protests. We did receive one approval. And just for the board's knowledge, public comment period ends on November 28th. And the Board of Adjustment hearing is scheduled for November 29th. Staff is requesting the DRB to review the requested variances and make a recommendation to the Board of Adjustment. As a reminder, the board will be reviewing the requested variances for compliance with Board of Adjustment findings for approval as noted in attachment A of the agenda. This concludes staff's presentation. Mr. Chair, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Sounds good. Thanks for that.
And we have with us, Mr. Chair, also the applicant, George. Is that you that's gonna do the presentation? You're muted.
Yes, thank you. I will be doing the presentation.
Okay.
I'd say let's move into getting some little more info about some of the specifics of what Mark just outlined, and go through your presentation. Then we'll open it up to questions and discussion.
Yes, of course.
So George, feel free to share your screen to help you with your presentation.
Yes, will do. Can you all see my screen there? Perfect. Okay. So the project as it sits right now, it's a vacant lot as Mark has described. The development plan was submitted with the intention of building the commercial storage. And just the site itself is a narrow lot, very long in the east-west direction. And we are bounded by three major streets, or three streets on three sides of the property. The property to the north happens to be a residential use. So the owners, when they purchased this lot, they realized there were not too many options as far as uses that they could propose here, just because of the limited availability of space. And so they chose a commercial storage use because those uses actually require very little parking compared to other uses or other commercial uses. So in planning the building itself, the idea is to try to gain as much usable square footage for the business so it could be a successful business. However, after going into the code requirements and the setbacks and the landscape buffer yards, since we are bordered by three streets, then that would require us to have at least a 10-foot buffer yard on at least three sides. And then the fact that the neighbor to the north is a residential use, then the interior landscape border requirement also requires a 10-foot buffer yard. So when we take into account the these dimensions that we have to squeeze the building footprint by, then we realized that the building itself was going to be kind of like an awkward shape, long and narrow. And what we were thinking of proposing is to see if we could, there is a screen that is required as far as the interior border on the north, a 5-foot screen at least. So the idea was to see if we could use the north building wall as the screen itself, and then avoid having the 10-foot of landscaping between the screen wall and the building itself. So we did our best to accommodate the parking required and the services that are required with the dump truck and the loading zones, and access to the street. So we moved our access obviously closer to the kind of like the local streets down the west versus Oracle, to alleviate any traffic congestion that would occur on that side. So that is like the concept of the layout. When we look at the landscape plan itself, you could see that it's dominated a good, best portion of it by the landscape buffer yards on at least the 3 sides. We are proposing to keep the 10-foot buffer yard on the north, just west of the building. Everything would stay the same on that side. But we even had to ask the Department of Transportation permission to be allowed to put at least 5 feet of landscaping in the right of way. So we have gotten that approval, and we felt that this would definitely help in the design of the exterior of the building, at least having access in and around the building itself. So the idea for the storage is that we could have multiple exits within the building. It's all interior, and that we could place egress, of course, in the building and then also outside of the building. So by us pushing some of the landscape into the right of way, that actually gained us some square footage that we could accommodate the egress and access to and from the building there. Looking at the neighborhood fabric here, the proposed site there is surrounded by a combination of commercial property and residential property. Oracle Road is a major street and route there. Just looking at the development, this it's been developed for quite a while, and there doesn't seem to be any new development that inherits some of the zoning code requirements that this site is now supposed to adhere to. But you can see that a lot of the commercial properties are abutting next to the residential, and there are similar conditions to what our site I guess the qualities of our site are inherent in some of these properties where they do abut next to residential zones. So we, when looking at this, we felt that we're not being granted any special privileges that other properties already have. So we felt that this would be a viable request to be able to reduce that northern landscape buffer yard at least on that 160-foot building length dimension there. And then looking at just some of the pictures of the property, the northern property already has a screen fence. They do have a backyard already. The lot itself is just vacant. There's no vegetation on it. One of the things when we met with when we had that neighborhood meeting, so the neighbors, they seem to be forming some sort of community with the business owners around this area here, and they they want to invite the new owners to to join their like little association. It's nothing formal, but they're very curious as to know what type of business is going to go in here, and they're interested in also knowing about the owners themselves if they're local as well. And they did express some concerns to us about trying to keep the neighborhood fabric intact and avoid any negative impact on them. And so they're grouping together, and the whole point of this is that in this area we do notice a lot of transient activity. There are just people that are setting up camps wherever they could find any property here. So they were kind of encouraging the fact that if we could eliminate zones or areas where people could possibly use to create maybe some sort of camp, or that they would definitely would not want that because it could have a negative impact on their businesses as well. And I think the owners here would agree with that. So we felt that by pushing the wall up next to the residential zone, that would eliminate that zone or alley of landscaping where it could be a possible use for somebody to camp out there as well. So in short, it was just the idea of trying to maximize the building footprint in the north-south direction, just to accommodate a practical business for their business model, and be able to include egress in and out of the building, and still be able to make this business work for them, and that's the approach, and then that's why we're requesting the deletion of that northern landscape border. Any questions?
And thanks for that, for your presentation, your summary of your project. I do want to open it up to the board. Susanna, looks like you have a
Yes.
hand up.
Have you got any massing kind of elevation or plan to kind of support your argument that you need the building this wide? And how, I mean, it seems important how tall it's going to be, right? For the light, for those neighbors.
Yeah, so we just did just the basic massing at this point. We haven't gone to the next level of designing the actual building itself, but we were thinking of at least keeping the building at least 20 feet or less, just because of the fact that this would be imposing on the light and air of the neighborhood to the north. But our requirement was just to keep it that. As far as the layout goes, the owner was trying to see, he wants to make this as flexible as possible, where he could accommodate the interior based on the clientele that comes and solicits a space from them. So, you know, we do have exits on the west, on the south, right in the middle of the building, and also the north part as well, just to be able to have egress in and out of the building. Now, whether that egress is on the south wall, or if there's a central corridor with smaller units with a central corridor through the middle of the building, that is yet to be decided.
Yeah, just it seems that massing in terms of a section across the site, you're going to probably be blocking the light for those unit gardens for half the year at 20 feet. So it seems like that should be a drawing that should be shown to either those residents or should be part of this application.
Yes, understood. That is something that we could definitely show in a model, and then maybe do a solar shade study to show that maybe part of it will be blocked during certain parts of the season. I know the building, they're set back at least 12 feet from the property line, the existing, I guess the facade of the building, where they have windows. So I think, you know, without doing a study, that there could be a possibility that they still get a direct light.
I don't think so.
I'm sorry?
I don't think it will be, from personal experience of having a yard facing south like that.
Okay.
I could add some information to that. General rule of thumb is the building height on the winter solstice will cast a shadow length of 1.5 times its height. So the building height that you're proposing is 20 feet. So you're going to get a shadow length of about 30 feet here.
Okay.
I have a quick question for Mark Castro as part of maybe outlining a little bit of our purview of what we're looking at here, that the zero lot line on the north has criterion and some zoning requirements, especially what we were just talking about as far as shade and blocking of solar access. That's not something we, building location isn't something we typically take on this board. It's more the kind of the stuff happening around the building or associated with the development. So where are you guys? Your meetings are at the end of the month. Is there still concern or part of the topics of those meetings going to be whether or not that zero lot line is even going to be allowed to happen?
I understand, Mr. Chair and members of the board. Yes, I understand the concern about the building placement. But by zoning regulations, the property owner, the applicant, has the right to build the building up to a 0 foot. According to zoning, the setback standards, the 0 foot is allowed. And just a reminder, the variances that are being requested before the Board of Adjustment have to do with the deletion of the landscape border with some modifications with relocating the required trees into other landscape borders. And that's going to be the same same purview for the Board of Adjustment. They're looking for, when they're reviewing the variance request, they want to make sure that it's complying with those 7 standards for approval, whether it's, what's the physical circumstance, is it a self-imposed hardship? And I think there are, in this instance, because we're just talking about landscaping, we're not talking about the actual building setback. So just keep that in mind moving forward with discussion.
Yeah, I wanted to just bring that point back around that we kind of have to assume the building's going to be where it is as far as what we're looking at. We're really just looking at whether or not we're going to allow or recommend approval for a variance of not providing a landscape border on that north side and a couple other spots. So I just wanted to refocus our conversation on that and make sure I was thinking about that correctly.
Right. I'm sorry, go ahead.
But in a sense, that landscape border does give a setback. I mean, they are related, right? I mean, how can you build up to a lot line if you're required to do a landscape border?
So I think I might be able to answer that. The code, zoning code itself does not require a setback line. The landscape border is required because there's a residential use to the north of it. If it was a commercial use, there wouldn't be any landscape requirement at all.
If I could, Mr. Chairman, I have my hand up.
Yeah, go ahead, Carol.
Well, it seems to me we're putting this application, correct me if I'm wrong, we're putting the cart before the horse. The building is not yet fully developed, and typically the landscape is in response to the proposed building. So it I am concerned about this, but I'm not sure the impact it has on this application. I'd like to hear from other board members on this.
Rosemary, you're next.
I just wanted to say that in response to the discussion about, preventing homeless encampments in that space that would be between the wall and the building, if that were to occur, I think it makes sense to go with the configuration that's shown. And given that the building is going to be on the lot line, or the wall will be on the lot line, I don't really see an opportunity for a landscape buffer there, but I wonder if there's something else that could be given to the neighbors. I don't know if there's a way that they could be given alternate landscaping elsewhere on the property that would improve their view a bit, or I don't know if there's a way that they could, if part of that budget that would have been allocated for landscape could be given to them. I mean, I don't know if there's a precedent for that.
So I know that the requirement of the landscaping is being implemented in other landscape borders, but on this property only, right? And so we're still required to, well, our proposal is that we're going to be using the trees and the plantings that were going to be used on that northern border, and we're going to distribute it around the remaining landscape buffer yards on the property itself.
Nate, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I guess for clarity, the real question in my mind is, if you get relief from a required landscape buffer, then you're entitled to build right on the property line, and you have compelling reasons to do that. Homeless encampment attraction being one, but also to make it a usable piece of land for your building. We don't know what the building looks like. Hopefully
Right.
it will be articulated so that it's not such an eyesore. I guess that's what it's coming down to in my mind is, if there's relief from a landscape buffer, then you can build to the 0 lot line. And they want the DRB to say, to grant or recommend the relief of the landscape buffer, which we normally don't do. But we're evaluating this circumstance. And I guess I'm just kind of recapping in my mind. And I don't really have a comment, except I'm checking to see if I have the right understanding.
I think that's where I was going with my initial question too, Nate, was if the building's location, is something that we need to look at. And I come back around. My question is, in looking at some of the criteria, is this a self-imposed hardship? Has the opportunity been explored to 0 lot line on the south side? And use that landscape space on the north side, and just have a secured space between the property line fence that's existing and the corners of the building, with an exit only to create that safe space in there, but have it landscaped. Is that an opportunity that's on the table, available within zoning and with the requirements of this project? Has that been explored?
So I can have Mark back check my findings, but there is a street setback from Flores Street. So placing the building on the actual property line itself would also not be in compliance with not only the street setback, but also the landscape border on the south as well. So
Right, would require
be
a variance, right? Which is what
Right.
we're in the process of looking at currently.
Right.
right. Mhm.
So I'd like to understand the reasoning for not pursuing that action. Is there some other factor other than self-imposed desire to move the building to the back that would keep you from exploring that option or pursuing that option versus this one?
Chris, that's an excellent question. And if I may, my thought on that is, if you bring the building out to the frontage, that sort of doesn't look good for the public either. It's not a huge improvement in my mind, but something to think about. A question I wanted to ask is, what is the current setback with the residences How close are they to their property line?
So our initial investigation, they're about 12 feet from the property line.
Mm.
Okay. Okay, so they have the proper setback, it seems, from the property line.
On the north side, looks like, yeah, that, or on their south side from our north, this project's north property line, yeah, it's about 12
Right.
feet, correct? So it's been noted. And on Oracle, it looks like their building facade set back another couple feet farther back than the facade of this building, which I think the streetscape aspect of that might look okay. Or at least be consistent as far as the building facade setbacks from Oracle. Rosemary, you have your hand up?
Yeah, so I was just thinking, I can't really tell, what is the height of that existing wall or fence that the neighbors have between their property and the subject property?
That's a 5-foot fence.
Okay, is it a
Yeah.
chain link or what kind of fence is it?
No, it's like the metal, it's like a metal
Corrugated.
fence. Mhm,
Corrugated metal, so it's solid, right? It's a solid fence. So
Yes.
even if you put landscaping there, unless it were higher than the height of the fence, they wouldn't see it.
Right, they won't see the landscaping, that's correct.
And within a 5-foot border, you're talking about putting what kind of landscaping there that would make sense even. I mean, it would have to be something very vertical and tall and narrow, and I'm just trying to like evaluate whether that would add value at all.
That's a good line of thinking there, Rosemary. I like that.
I agree with Rosemary that it would be a hard space to landscape. I'm also wondering if that existing fence is going to remain in place. And I know that you might not have that answer, but is it going to be a fence against a wall? What is the expected condition?
Yeah, my expectation would be that the fence would be replaced with a CMU wall to match the material of the building.
Yeah, and that could be an improvement to the existing fence. Something more structural and permanent. And what's the height of that wall, the screen wall?
It's 5 feet.
Oh, okay. The one that you're putting on. And okay.
Correct.
But if my understanding is correct, the building's they're asking for a 0 lot line for the building. The building is a proposed 20 feet.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a tall building compared to the residential residents to the north. And like I said before, in winter solstice, that's going to be casting almost a 30-foot shadow into their properties.
Carol, I'm going to correct that they're allowed to go up to 20 feet. There is no proposed building height currently.
Right, but I'm just
semantics.
saying, right. Oh, okay. See,
No.
I still think the cart is before the horse. They're designing the landscape around a building that we don't know enough about, perhaps.
Well, I think we know enough that if a 20-foot tall wall is going to cast a 30-foot shadow, moving it 10 feet, it's still going to cast a shadow.
Correct.
Okay.
Grace, did you have another? Susanna had her hand up and then, but it's giving me numbers. So I think it's trying to track what order people put their hands up.
Yeah, so going back to the question, I think Susanna was getting at, which was that the required landscape buffer given the zoning to the north, I think is effectively giving us that setback. I think my reading would be that's the intention there, is that it would require us to have the building farther from the lot line. And I'm curious if we're granting a variance from that, are we asking for anything in terms of like articulation, public commercial storage? I'm assuming we're not going to have windows overlooking those people's, backyards of the apartments next door, but In what way are we making sure that that's not just, looming in their yard? We're giving them an exception here, and how can we make sure that it's as pleasant as possible, I guess.
Yeah, it's going to be a part of our conditions, I believe, if we make any. Susanna, what do you got to add in here?
I just wanted to correct that you guys were talking about a 5-foot area for planting, and it's 10 foot that is required. And I don't think it matters if someone can see a tree. It's just the idea of more light. The 30 foot may be at the winter solstice, but that 22 feet that they get may mean that, 3 more months they are getting light in their yard and windows, which is a basic requirement of, light and air is just fundamental. So I don't see enough detail on the building to warrant a change. And can you just, and if I was a cynic about architectural design, I would say part of the increased landscape on the south and east in an area that isn't highly pedestrianized. It's not like this is downtown. There isn't, those buffers, could camouflage an ugly building if it's just a box with no windows. But I'm just worried that, approving something like this without looking at specifics of a building is setting a bad precedent.
Yeah.
And are you maximizing that south setback? Are you right on the required setback for that, or is there can it move slightly to the south? I don't know if that's been investigated.
So the building corner on the southeast is at the setback line itself. So we are maximizing that with respect to the building.
Yeah, but I guess my point is there are very interesting, very narrow buildings, and without seeing a plan it just seems you're just trying to maximize, which is typical for kind of massing and development studies. But I personally am there's a reason these things exist for residents, and I do think we need to protect those.
We're trying to maximize the building footprint so it could be a viable business project for the owners. And that's our intention.
Yeah,
make sure this is a successful business for them.
Yeah, I guess we're not seeing the detail of what that business is and a plan to see that if it was narrower, it wouldn't work. I guess I'm not convinced of the argument that a narrower building would not work.
I guess Susanna, that gets to the question of self-imposed hardship in our criteria, right? Is the size of the building imposing the hardship? If the building's not designed and it's not a set standard required width for that use of business, or the design of the site is not set within the standards of an architectural requirements for life, safety, and welfare, is that the imposed hardship on this site? That's kind of where I'm heading with my questions or my thoughts. Rosemary, you've had your hand up for a minute.
Yeah, just a couple questions too. Like without knowing a lot about the building, do we know if it's double loaded or not? Because if it's not double loaded, maybe it could be accessed from the south. All of the units could be accessed from the south, and then the whole thing could be pushed back, and the landscape border could be justified to the north a bit more. And then just one other thought: if we do end up with this condition where the building wall is on the lot line, in lieu of landscape, would it be possible to offer the residents of the neighborhood a mural on that wall that would at least give them some kind of interesting view?
Yeah, so to answer your first question, if you could allow me to share initial sketch by the client team. This was their original idea here. So it would be double loaded if that's if this is what double loaded means here, where we would have a central hallway with access doors off to the sides. As far as painting something on the north face to mimic some sort of like a mural, I'm sure the owners would be open to grant something back to the property owners to the north if that would allow the request.
Okay.
Marie, can we pull up the 7 criteria we need to run through real quick? I think we might. I feel like we've come back around almost full circle, and I think
Right.
we just need to start clicking through some criterion and see how some of the questions and comments that and conversation we've already had relate back to these items. Because in my prior experience and having to go through variances, some of these questions or criteria are slightly lawyer speak, if that makes any sense, where they have some interpretation available. And I've always had challenge making determinations with these in making sure that clients I was representing met the criteria. So let's start going through some of these if we can. The key term of this is the board may grant a variance only if it finds the following, and I believe it's a unanimous. All 7 need to be met, or at least to our opinion, fulfill or meet the requirement of the question. And even if one of them is it's not because of this or doesn't meet this, then we go backwards. So that because there are special circumstances applicable to the property, strict enforcement of the UDC will deprive such property privileges enjoyed by other property of the same classification in the same zoning district. Is this project getting special attention? Or not getting the special attention that another property has gotten?
If I may speak, it's hard for me to determine that without knowing more about the building.
Typically within, and this is kind of where I'm kind of wanting to roll back to this, and that I would expect applicant to have some reasoning or some background information or answers to some of these as to why they feel they're in compliance with being allowed a variance in this instance. Is that?
Yeah, no, that's no problem. I've already answered these questions, but I didn't know if this was for the board members to answer themselves. But so yes, and in respect to the first question, when I started the presentation, I made note of the narrowness of the lot and the businesses that could occupy this type of lot. So there was consideration of trying to use propose a use for the owners that would be less intensive on the parking requirements, so they could actually take advantage of the allowable area for their type of business. So less parking was being proposed or the use for less parking, and it just seems that the requirement, it's unfortunate that the lot is bordered by 3 streets that already reduce the usable space, and then having the 4th setback also impose that on the property, then yes, I mean this is the lot itself, the configuration and the conditions around it do basically hinder the allowable space that could be enjoyed, you know, by somebody else that in the neighborhood that doesn't have those conditions.
Correct. So the criterion for this one really is that the Oracle setback and the street setbacks and other borders required would inhibit this site from being able to use an allowable use under a C2 zoning.
Right.
Correct.
Well, Chris, this is Nate. Just for comments, my thought is it's not the setbacks per se that are rendering the parcel unusable. It's the length and the width of the parcel. So it seems to me a miss in the due diligence. If you have a vision of a certain square foot building and then you go look for a lot of land, this one is the inappropriate choice.
Well, that's I guess, Nate, that's that's question number
That's-
two, really.
Right.
Question number one really is there something about this site and the physical characteristics of it and the UDC requirements of it making it unable to be a C2 property, which other properties in the area have actually become businesses? I feel that it would be, that answer may be a no. You could put a coffee kiosk on this site or some other use that would still allow it to have commercial value, right? Susanna, you have a comment on this question?
Yes, and I would say even for this particular type of building, like a storage facility, I don't see the due diligence to show that a 46-foot wide building is the minimum that can work for this type of facility, assuming that double loaded corridor. And that may be the case, but I feel more background work could have been done to show that.
Correct. So that I still think this is your comment and Nate's comment really are about number two. Number
Right.
one is really about, is there anything that, you know, I think let's just move on to number two, because I think they meet number one. Like, you could actually still do a business there. But I'm more along the lines that this is a self-imposed issue.
Yeah. I agree.
It's a business selection type and a building massing question, and that it's not, I haven't seen evidence that the structure or sizing of that building is criterion for that use of that business, that's the minimum sizing of that building.
It seems like a mismatch, Chris. The proposed building, which is not developed yet because they
Yeah.
want to figure out if they can fully use the lot size, but
Right.
it just seems like
Right.
an unfortunate mismatch.
So let's move through these. I think we will come back to number two, because there's a couple others in here that I think we'll have lively discussion on. Number three, the variance granted, subject to conditions, will assure that the adjustment authorized shall not constitute a grant of special privileges inconsistent with limitations upon other properties in the vicinity. I lost track of that sentence about 14 words ago. I do believe are we granting this property something that another property next door is not going to be allowed to be
No.
to go after a variance of similar nature? And I don't think we would be. We're not entertaining that idea. That I think another property could probably go after similar ideas. I think number 4, 5, and 6 are the ones that are going to really be the topics of what we do. One, I'll be truthful, I really don't understand what number 3 means. So I'd either let's get clarification from staff on what that criteria is before we dismiss it, or if there's someone on this board that really understands lawyer talk about code better than I do, I'd love to entertain a comment.
Mark, can you please clarify?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Yeah, trust me, it took me a while to understand this language, Chris, so I totally understand. So number three, what number three is getting at is if the board were to grant a variance or variances in their request, the board would not be granting something like a special favor. You're not doing this as a special favor or something without reasonable conditions. So let's say there's a property within the area, zone C2, that wants to do a similar project. And again, yeah, it's all about a special, granting a special privilege. So if they wanted to do the same thing, they could request the same variances. Also, you could look at existing conditions of properties in the area, look at how buildings are oriented, looking at landscape borders, what they look like, and kind of comparing with what they're proposing. So if one property in the neighborhood is using a zero setback with no landscape borders, why can't this property do the same thing? So that's kind of where that one's getting at.
Right, there's no backdoor handshakes going on. Number four is I think back to kind of what we were talking about with one, that there's a special circumstance applicable to just this property, including the size, shape, topography, location, surroundings, that properly cannot be reasonably developed in conformity with the UDC. I've always interpreted this as, is there a big rock outcropping or a wash or some sort of natural element or topography, is there a slope on it that makes it difficult to fully develop to the zoning opportunities within the UDC. I do not see that here other than UDC and other setback requirements. There's no physical features of this site. They're making it hard to develop. Any discussion on this one?
Totally agree.
Number five, that granting the variance shall not be detrimental to the public welfare or injurious to other property or improvements in the neighborhood which the property is located. I think the discussion of this one and number six would likely go together, where the discussion of this variance really is putting a property or a building structure on zero lot line on the north side going to be detractive or creating some sort of harm to the adjacent property. Not even getting into the light and air and shade requirement is just putting a building of that size going to impact negatively the property adjacent or to public welfare.
Yes. In my opinion, yes.
Yes, totally.
Doing a business like that.
I would agree without having a building design and knowing the building height.
Yeah, I agree.
I would want to give some discussion to that. The location of this actually is in some way in a response to trying to reduce detriment to public welfare by creating an advantageous nuisance by pulling it back from the property line a little bit. So there is some, I'd say, there is some part of that argument within this number five question, that the location of that is actually doing some beneficial locating for the health and safety of the general public, right? With a bus stop there and some other public gathering opportunity. Number six is the one we're going to talk about, I think. Variance shall not impair an adequate supply of light and air to adjacent property, substantially increase congestion, or substantially diminish or impair property values within the neighborhood. I'm not a real estate agent, but I'm not sure how having a property that close on property line would affect property values of the residential property directly adjacent. I would think those units may not have as much rentability, may have an impact there. I'm not going to make that assumption. I'm not in the, I'm not someone to make that professional determination, but I do believe light and air is going to be impacted on that north property. Any discussion on this one?
I would
I
agree.
Agree.
And along those lines, I don't believe that the development plan is approved yet for this either. So, you know, I think all of it's still in flux. It's all still in the works, and so it just
Well,
seems like.
Well, that's part of the process we're in right now, right? Is that
Yeah.
there was a submittal to a development plan, and the development plan comments came back, said you're not in compliance with the UDC. You either need to redesign or get a variance. So in order for the development plan to be approved, we either need to recommend that the variance be granted or
not.
go, you know,
Right,
back to
and I
go.
And we need more information in order to make that determination. We need a,
Yes.
you know, we need a building floor plan. We need building sections. We need a site section. We need elevations in order to determine that, in my opinion.
Yes. Would it make a difference to us as a board if we weren't thinking about 20 feet and we were thinking about a max height feet of 12? Would that substantially change the way we're interpreting some of these variance criteria?
I would.
That would,
Go ahead, Carol.
sorry, that would help me, but I'm also thinking instead of double loaded, single loaded, a 12-foot maximum height, the single loaded, but I know that may not be profitable in terms of their business.
But it might be suitable for the lot size and their request. I think it's just a bridge too far to build 20 feet right in someone's backyard wall. I certainly wouldn't want that in my backyard, for example, especially when there's a 10-foot a buffer yard requirement that got waived.
Right, I agree.
I don't think we should get into the details of that because
Yeah.
personally a 12-foot wall is a problem to me too. But I don't think that's what we need to debate right now.
No, I think the question on this one really is, even if they met UDC requirements with the 10-foot pushback on this north side, they'll still be allowed to put a 20-foot structure in that space. Light and air, you know, that on the winter solstice, that would be the still impacting light. The question I have on this would be, what is the timeline or the time stamp on light availability for an adjacent property? Like what, you know, for our other reviews, it's got a specific time and date that we're using as a criterion. And currently we're using the discussion point as the lowest, shortest day of the year. Is someone going to get a slice of light through their window? I'm not sure that's the criteria we need to use. Mark, is there a time or for this conversation? Is there something that's used as a kind of a standard?
No, not for this, not for this specific criteria. There's no standard. It's just basically what's typical of what would normally be available between the two uses.
Okay.
Well, I would disagree. It's come from somewhere historically, but maybe we don't know what caused that initially.
I should probably beat up on this. not to
Yeah.
derail the conversation, but we have a project in Phoenix that's actually going through this, and we're having to try to figure out this criteria right now. Someone put a very, very, very tall building just to the south of a client's property, and it's 100% shade 100% of the time. So that maybe that's the criterion.
There's also, solar access for solar power, panels, whatnot. There's that criteria. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not, that's not necessarily under this purview. I think
Right.
It'd be an interesting one to investigate, but I do think, in my opinion, that if without knowing the proposed height of the structure, I don't need to know what's going on inside the structure, but without knowing the proposed height of the structure that that the client or that the applicant is attempting to move to the zero lot line, I don't think we can make this determination adequately or with strong confidence. All we can do is assume that they are allowed to do up to 20-foot building and that they would maximize that 20 feet.
Correct.
And within that, even on a summer solstice, I believe that air and sun and light, access to light to these residential units on the north side is going to be impacted. Grace, you have a comment?
Yeah, just that their code review in the development plan indicates a max height of 40 feet, proposed height of 20 feet.
Well, even worse.
Yeah.
that statement's not helping in my opinion.
No.
So proposed height of 20 feet is yeah, I'm not going to get into design. Do we have any other comments about item 6?
No, I just want to make a note that since the building design has not been completed or started, that there is a note that it's 20 feet or less. So, that is like the client's wishes. We could ask, our goal was to ask to see if that, how would the board members react to that, and we're starting to understand the impact of what that might be. So I'm pretty sure that the owners would be willing to, rethink that height. It wasn't a set height. We did say that it could be less, but it could be a higher height. Apparently the height could be 40 feet if we move it 10 feet back. So, I'm sure that the client would want to maybe rethink that, and maybe we could establish that to help. And I think it is in this condition, being that we do have residential living to the north, that being considerate of some of the winter solstice lighting would actually help if we knew how much it would be impacted. Now, we're in this type of climate, it's not as crucial as, say, maybe people that are in the north, but it's still light, and it's still a feature that maybe some people might enjoy. So I think that with respect to determining a building height, I think the owners would be able to compromise and find a height that would maybe satisfy a lot of the other points, because at this point, if what we're talking about is imposing a shadow or something versus all the other positives about putting the building on the north, then I think we could maybe see if we can meet maybe in the middle to make everybody feel more comfortable with having a building that close to the next residential building there. That was my only comment.
I would think from my perspective on this board that having some, as I think we started this conversation, due diligence or some massing diagrams to illustrate sun, shade, shadow on this property from different locations would behoove this application, in that proving or showing and illustrating that this is not an owner imposed restriction on the property. Just in my head, when you were talking about that, is if you push this thing down 10 feet and narrowed it up and made it 3 stories tall, you probably have a viable business model. I don't know how self-storage works on multiple levels, but there might be an option there. Like, it's just all about cost, right? And what the property's willing to, or property owner's willing to incur to open their business. So, I would love to see that diagram as a supporting document to this application, because if you pulled that, in reality, if you pulled that building south 10 feet and it made it narrower, we wouldn't be sitting here. You wouldn't need a variance.
Right.
You would be able to build that thing, and you'd be able to build it 40 feet tall and not have anyone ask you any questions. You'd meet the development plan requirements. You may have to get a parking variance. That's about it. So I'm kind of circling back around that. And the number 7 here is just the minimum variance, so we can afford relief. I don't think so. I think this is asking more than minimum. I think you could rearrange this property and come back with a smaller landscape border on one side. I can think of probably 3 or 4 different things that would be lesser variances to make this property a profitable business. Are we willing to move into motions and figure out where we're going to go, or have discussion about moving towards a motion, board?
Yes, I think we are.
Where are we headed, Nate?
Well, I'm inclined to make a motion that we recommend not approving this request for variance. And we think that, I think that relieving them from a landscape buffer would impose negative consequences for the neighbor.
I'm in agreement with that.
It's a bummer at the residential use to the north. I think if this was a commercial use to the north, we'd have a different conversation going on.
Certainly.
I'd be willing to entertain those emotion of that. I think is it seemed like out of 1 through 7, we found maybe 3 of those were, as far as the application went, we're not meeting that criteria of those.
I still contend that number 3, I believe, or number 2, that we don't fully have enough information to agree with that this is not a self-imposed.
Correct. That's where I was gonna. We have
Yeah,
that, the
it's-
light, and then another one in there
Right.
was was iffy, and whether or not the
Right.
application as proposed was fulfilling those requirements, or adequately justifying them. So I'd be willing to hear some motions.
Ugh, this is hard. Would you suggest quoting the 3 things that we feel are they're not?
I think we can keep it simple and just
Okay.
say we don't find it in compliance with the criteria. It didn't pass all the tests. I would do it myself, but since I'm driving, I don't have a good way of reading my screen.
I agree with Nate.
Okay.
And I just want to say to the applicant, George, thank you so much for your attitude of, cooperation. And it sounds like you did kind of come to figure things out and work through it with us. So I really appreciate your willingness.
Yep, you're welcome.
And Mr. Chair, members of the DRB, if I can ask Mark Castro the question, if the DRB has a choice of continuing this case, requesting the applicant to return with, the information they were discussing.
Oh,
Yep, that is an option if the board desires to want to continue this to get additional information, we can also, we would have to continue the Board of Adjustment public hearing as well. But that is an option on the table.
Thank you, Mark.
Is it considered a continuance if they come back with a completely different design?
It's going to depend on how much of a change it is. If it's just, if the design is still the same, but there's like slightly modifications and what we advertised matches what, maybe what changes they made. But if it's a completely new design and the modifications requested have changed, then it's a whole new notice and they're basically starting from scratch.
So that would then have to go back to the neighborhood if it's a big change as compared to what they showed the neighborhood back in August, correct?
That is correct. They would have to hold another neighborhood meeting, and then we'd have to do a whole new notice and a whole new schedule.
Oh boy.
I would say I don't think we're requiring these guys to give us additional information. So I don't think we do need them to come back.
But don't we want more information on the proposed building? I think we are asking for additional information.
But I would say whether it's, I have a problem with it being on the lot line period for residential. So the detail, of the height or whether the building is designed is irrelevant.
Okay.
And why is that?
Because you've got residential use that you're blocking light and air for them, and which is why there is a setback for residential.
So there's no boundary on your thinking about how much light and air is being blocked, or is there?
Well, potentially if you had a design that was a height of a wall and you did had an angled building potentially, but I don't think that would be usable for a commercial building. I mean, if you had a building that matched the solar envelope.
Yeah. And I'm just trying to investigate and find out what criteria would you be comfortable with. If it's just any criteria, if the wall is 6 feet tall or 7 feet tall, whatever the code minimum building height is, would that still, would you still feel the same about being that close to the neighbor to the north? Then that wouldn't matter then whether we come back with a new design or not, or a different height or not. At what height does it feel like we're not imposing?
Let me jump in here for a minute and answer that question. That we cannot impose that height. We can't tell you what that is. What I think, Susanna, if I can answer these two topics, additional information that we could request to come back with is a shade study showing that the height of the building proposed is not going to impose light and air blocking or any impose harm on the adjacent property. I think that would be information that would allow us to move forward or not move forward on this application, because that's our main sticking point. Susanna, would that be, if they came back with some sort of documentation and diagramming that showed the actual impact or what the shade looked like on solstice 1, 2, 3, and 4 throughout the year, of what the impacts of the neighboring property would be? If they could prove a building at 12 foot wouldn't block the light for 200 days a year, or is it 0 days a year?
Well, yeah. Well, I would just say that a building of 10 feet will probably block it on winter solstice. I don't think we're just looking at one day of the year.
Correct.
For that whole winter period, and it isn't for people too. This also can give them heat and save on their energy bills too. It's not just if someone wants to sit in the sun or grow plants in their yard. There are multiple reasons for this, but I'm not sure. So we could ask to do that, but just knowing solar geometry, I don't think it's going to go that well. So I'm just trying to drag this out, essentially.
Right. So I'm kind of zeroing in on this question of the word adequate supply and the definition of what that means within this process and within the jurisdiction, you know, from the city's point of view. That's a pretty subjective criterion, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm kind of with Susanna on this. I think that no matter how small or large your parcel is, you would, if you could get someone to approve a 0 lot line, you would do it. So it really doesn't matter the size of the lot. It is sort of narrow, but I'm not interested in waiving the landscape buffer because that's there to protect the residents. So why would we remove it? I don't see justification for removing it.
Mm-hmm.
And even if it's a 10-foot building right on their backyard wall, why did we do that? For what reason? And I don't think it's been laid out that this is a justification. It is a small lot. So I think it's going to attract a smaller scale development.
Right.
So
They bought a small lot.
Yeah.
Right.
It's like my water heater closet in my garage. I got a water heater, 2 air handlers, and a panel. That's too much stuff for one closet. Too much stuff.
Right.
So I just think they're trying to put too much on this particular piece of land. And I don't think that the solution is to build right on the lot line. That's not one that the building code contemplates.
Right.
Carol?
Whoops.
Rose up a little.
I'm sorry, it broke up there.
I was calling your hand.
Oh, well, to state the obvious and answer the applicant's question, move it, adhere to the landscape borders, move it away from the 0 lot line. I mean, that's the obvious thing, right?
You have to figure out a new model, right?
Right.
That's within.
Okay, so where I was heading with that last round of conversation was whether or not we want to ask them to come back with more information, or if we just want to give a blanket no in this motion. Whoever wants to.
We don't need any more. We don't need any more information, in my opinion.
Okay. I'd be willing to hear some motions.
Mr. Chair, members of the DRB, just trying to entertain the potentials here, but if the applicant was to provide that 10-foot landscape border along the north property line, and they move their building closer to the south property line, that would require a variance. They will need to be reviewed by the DRB. Again, if that's the route they choose to go. If that's the case, then it would need to come back to the DRB for review.
Under a
Either
whole new
way.
variance process, yes.
Correct. Okay.
That's understood.
Okay, thanks.
I'd like to chime in. This is Mark. Yeah, so if they do move it closer to the south, and it does impact the landscape border, yes, they will need to come back to DRB. But if it doesn't impact the landscape border and it's just a setback modification, then it would not require DRB.
Correct. If they changed the design of the building and moved it south, like there's variables here that they could on their end modify to still meet code. hence back to this as a self-imposed condition, in my opinion.
Uh-huh.
Can we get the motion language on the screen for us to look at?
Would you pull over, Mark? You willing to, or Nate, you willing to read a motion?
I just know we got to get that on the screen so people can start reading it.
Yep, I'd be willing to hear some motions. Let's get this thing rolling.
I can take a stab at it if you'd like.
Sounds great. Thank you.
All right, the Design Review Board has reviewed the proposed landscape buffer yard screening modifications, reductions, and deletions, and recommends to the Board of Adjustment denial, finding that the project is not in compliance with the criteria established in UDC section 3.10.3.k.
Mark, does the DRB need to specify what portions of that section do not comply, or just that general statement is okay?
Just the general statement is fine. Thank you.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
That was Susanna on second. Any amendments or discussion? Hearing none, I'll put that to a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Nays? Hearing none? Or is that a nay?
No, I've actually thought you said Nate.
Oh, sorry.
I already voted aye.
You're like, someone said my name. Maria, it sounds like we had a unanimous vote there. Thank you for that application. That was a lively discussion. I hope you guys can figure out a solution that works for that property, for that owner.
Thank you for your time. We respect your decision and your thought process throughout this application here. So thank you for your time. Thank you.
Let's move on to agenda item 5, staff announcements.
Mr. Chair, members of the DRB, we were informed late last week by the clerk's office about the new guidelines the mayor and council just approved for holding meetings with the various boards, commissions, and committees. Staff is in the process of digesting that and trying to translate it into more plain terms. We're holding a meeting next week, but just to let you know, basically we need to agendize at the next DRB meeting this issue, because the DRB will need to vote on it. Whether or not, if I understand it correctly right now, if the DRB is gonna be wanting to continue in person or hybrid. DRB members would need to vote on that. If hybrid is the way to go, then DRB members can choose to keep joining meetings virtually. And if that's the case, each member will need to let staff know at least, I believe it was like 48 hours in advance or something like that. Also, if joining virtually, DRB members will need to keep their cameras on. And there's many parts that we still need to understand, but that's why we're holding a meeting next week. So at the next DRB meeting, I'll be better prepared to answer any potential questions the DRB most likely will have. So those are the news. In terms of cases, we're expecting by the December 1st scheduled meeting, the Diocese of Tucson coming in for proposed solar carports in the parking lot of the cathedral in downtown. So that's coming your way. As far as we know, some other things may pop. But as soon as I have all the materials ready for, these new guidelines from mayor and council, then I'll share them with you, and of course will be part of the agenda. And I think that's all I have.
You'll share those prior to the meeting, like via email, Maria?
Yes, correct. And they will
Okay.
be posted in your webpage as usual.
Just remember, board, if Maria sends that out, do not reply all to that email. That's a out of meeting discussion if we do.
Maria, I know you don't have all the info yet, but is there a date that the change would be occurring?
Now.
Immediately?
Like now. The only
Okay.
reason I didn't put it in this agenda is because I got that email from the clerk's office as the agenda was already posted. And but yeah, it would be as of now. But I'll forward the information as soon as I can.
Thank you.
It would be nice to have some clarity on some of the points within there. So if you guys are having an internal meeting, having information after that would be probably beneficial to our decision making.
Correct.
Any other announcements, board? Anyone have anything to share? Anything that needs to be on the record? Hearing none, I'd say let's drop the gavel and call this thing adjourned at 8:58.
Great, thank you.
Thank you
Thanks.
so much,
Thank you.
everybody, as
Thank
usual.
you.
Thank
Happy
you.
for your time.
holidays.
Thank you.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Yes, happy Thanksgiving. Thank you.
Thank you.